Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, we'll examine a game of two current giants, Vasily Ivanchuk from the Ukraine and Gata Kamsky of the United States. This game was played back in 2006 and was a Sicilian defense. We are going to brush through the opening moves of the game and going to focus on the middle game and the end game of this very instructional game. Let's get started just to show you the first moves of the game so you have an idea how it all started. Here we go. And e4, c5, knight f3, e6, open Sicilian, knight takes d4, a6. Well, this is the Polsen variation, which is rather popular in the past couple decades. White continued with bishop d3, and here it's not unusual that black responds with bishop c5 and puts the bishop on this at first sight unusual looking place a7. However, as we know, bishops are just as powerful from a distance as they would be from being close by. The advantage of the bishop being there is that obviously it covers all those squares on the diagonal. The disadvantage, on the other hand, is that it is far away from the d6 square, which is a likely position of black's d-pawn in the near future and is oftentimes a target of attack later in the game. White continued with queen e2, d6, and bishop e3, trading black's well-positioned bishop. Bishop takes, rook takes. It's true that the black rook looks in an awkward position at the moment, but at the same time there is no tactical tool to take advantage of it. White played c4. This is a move that now transforms the pawn structure into a so-called Maroczy bind position. That generally refers to the fact that white has an e4 and a c4 pawn, while the d file is semi-open, and black has a pawn on d6 that has no pawn protection. So therefore, white will have a clear plan in doubling up and trying to attack black's d6 pawn. Generally, black's game plan would be trying to prepare a liberating move either by d6 to d5 or, after of course preparation, b6 or b7 to b5. The game continued with both sides continuing develop, and castle, castle, and b6. Black is getting into a so-called hedgehog position, which, as I said, generally means that black is on the defense, however, is looking for the right opportunity to play either d5 or b5 to get out of the bind. This type of positions is a game of patience for both sides. White played queen e3, queen c7, bishop e2, queen b8. This at first awkward looking position for a queen is rather usual for this type of positions to try to aid the breakthrough with b5. Rook fd1. Now we can see that white is starting the piling up against the pawn on the d file, and black is getting ready to be on the defense. And we can see also that the black rook on a7, while at first when it got there looked awkward, now it's pretty clear that it's actually in a handy position, getting the rook to d7, which on one hand would give further protection to black's pawn on d6, and in fact at times can be helpful in aiding to play d6 to d5. And white here played rook d2, and black's response was e5. This is of course a somewhat risky move because it makes black's future d6, d5 plan pretty much impossible, so it's a very committal move. The advantage of it is that now the black bishop will have the opportunity to get out to e6. I'm personally not much of a fan of this move because now it's very clear that white will have a clear target in the d6 pawn without too much of a counterplay for black. White moved the rook to c1 for now. I'm not exactly sure why not immediately to d1, and after bishop e6, after all the rook landed on d1, and h6, getting rid of any back rank problems, and h3, white does the same. Well, as I said, I wasn't going to annotate too much on the opening moves of the game, but from here on we'll focus on every little detail that's important about this game. Well, black has pretty much one reasonable plan left, or at least reasonable active plan left, and that is trying to play b6 to b5, and therefore black played rook to b7. And this is one of those situations when actually it is a wise idea to simply not trying to prevent the opponent's plan, but rather to prepare for it. As they say, when your opponent is preparing a bad plan, don't stop him. And white played a seemingly harmless move, just positioning the bishop on f1, getting out of the way. And black here made a mistake. Black should have played knight e7 or some other more quiet move. But black was ready to play b5. Sometimes it can be psychologically difficult to deal with a passive position and without any shadow of activity. And let's see how Ivanchuk answered this. Trade. Now black has an option to, in addition to take back on b5, first trade bishop for knight, and only then to capture back on b5. That would not be a bad idea. The problem is that after bishop to b3, white will not capture the bishop, but will capture the knight. And then if bishop takes rook, pawn takes, and white is clearly ahead. We have white is a pawn up, and while the black bishop is hanging, it will need to retreat. Then white will have the time to protect the pawn on b7. So this is certainly out of question for black. So after cb5, black captured back with ab5. Generally, when black accomplishes playing b5 without any loss of material, it's a good sign. It is not the case here, and we shall see very quickly the very fine plan that white had, involving some important tactical nuances. If white would right now capture on b5 and then rook would capture, bishop capture, queen capture, that would be simply an exchange of material, bishop and knight for rook and pawn, which is equal, but that would certainly be welcomed by black, even though white could now capture the pawn on d6, but nevertheless black wouldn't mind that. So in this position, Ivanchuk played knight d5. Now, on one hand, this is a very natural looking move, centralizing the knight and threatening a devastating for black trade on f6. On the other hand, it gives black the opportunity to trade on d5, forcing white to capture with the pawn, and that means that black no longer has the weakness on d6. So at first it seems that it's certainly a welcomed development by black. But as you shall see, things are not quite so simple as they first seem. The knight moved to e7, and now comes the whole point. White plays a very important move, knight to a5. The important part is that the knight is gaining the momentum, attacking the black rook, and also is aiming to get to the key c6 square. Now, if black would play rook a7, trying to activate his rook on the a file, white would answer with knight c6, d c6, and if black captures the pawn, The point is that white can use the pin and simply capture the pawn on e5. Because of the pin, if black now captures, then rook captures, and obviously black can resign as the c-pawn will be unstoppable. So let's go back to this position where black can certainly play differently, and they did, played rook to c7. And now comes the key point of white's plan. White still plays knight c6. We'll see what happens when black captures on c6, as that is what happened in the game. But let's check out for a moment what black should have actually played, which was to capture on d5 and invite the exchange of queens with knight b8 and knight e3 and pawn takes knight and rook takes and now rook d6. In this position, white is still better because there are pawns on both sides of the board, and generally the bishop is superior to a knight in such positions, and black still has some weak points in his position. But yet black's position is clearly much better than it was in the game, where black was left with two weaknesses. In addition to the b pawn, also the d6 pawn remained rather weak. So in this position, black made probably the losing mistake of the game in capturing the c6 pawn. I bet from the distance of playing b5, and that is on move 20, so that is 6 pairs of moves ago, black overlooked white's opportunity to now play queen e5. If black now accepts the queen, then not only that white wins the material back, but wins a pawn also after bishop b5. Very importantly, black does not have the opportunity to check and then play rook c2, forking 2 pawns on the second rank, because that would be stepping into a fork and losing the rook. So therefore, capturing the queen would pretty much equal resigning the game, and black continued by playing b4. So this first stage of the game has completed in that the structure of the position completely changed, the position has opened up, and as a result black is left with two clear weaknesses, two isolated pawns. Now comes the technical part, and see how in a masterful way Ivanchuk transforms a positional advantage to material advantage and then eventually to a full point. The queen simply retreated to d4, and now black needs to defend against the attack on both pawns. If black now would play d5, then yet one more time white could use the pin with bishop c4, and if rook takes, queen takes. So we're getting familiar with this idea. The game continued with queen b6. Black is hoping that if there are less pieces, no queens on the board, the game may be closer to a draw. However, as we shall see, that is not the case at all. White continued with bishop to c4, a big improvement in the positioning of the bishop. The bishop is simply aiming to go to b3, from where, on one hand, it will guard the pawn on a2. Anytime a black rook would go to the a file, it will keep an eye on the f7 pawn. And if and when the black pawn would advance to d5, it would certainly immediately attack it. Black traded queens and played rook b6. Black, with his last move, prepared for the future upcoming attack on the pawn on b4, and of course white continued with bishop b3. So now actually the rook is pressuring both back pawns, and the other rook is about to go to the c file and enter on the 7th rank when white chooses to. Remember, at the moment both black rooks are stuck defending the pawn on d6. Therefore, black, following the endgame principle, bring your king closer to the center once there is no danger in the middle of the board. And played king f8, hoping to soon play king e7 and then free up from the duty of protecting the d6 pawn the rook on d8. And here comes a very common plan in these type of positions. White played g4. The plan is simple. White aims to play h4, then g5, so then the knight will be chased away from its ideal location, and once the knight is gone from f6, the rook would come from f4, targeting the f7 pawn. Black played king e7, and here a fine little intermediate move. While white certainly could play rook c1 right away, it's even smarter to first check, keeping in mind that the black king is busy protecting the pawn on f7 and therefore needs to retreat where it came from, and then only move the rook over to c1, occupying the other open file. So the idea is clear now. The rook wants to enter to the 7th rank. That explains black's response, which was rook to d7, and white played rook to c8 check. If now black would block the check, that would certainly not be a good looking move, as the knight would get into a nasty pin that certainly wouldn't end well. Therefore, the king got out of the check, and white continues with the plan h4. Now we can see the troubles that black is in. For example, if black just makes kind of a evading move, such as rook a6, white would indeed follow up with g5, and then when pawn takes, and the knight moves away to some place, here comes the checkmate. Isn't it amazing? With such few pieces left on the board, checkmate right in the middle. Pretty amazing. So after h4, black played g5 himself, trying to prevent white's further advancement with the g-pawn. Also, remember, the black pawns on g5 and h6 are now on opposite color squares than white's bishop. And yet, the ironic part is that we talked all along about the weaknesses that black had on b4, on d6, on f7, and believe it or not, at the end of the day, black suffers because of the weakness of yet another pawn on h6. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Although it's not that unusual that when you have one or several weaknesses, they simply spread as you're trying to kind of hold everything together. By doing so, you create further new weaknesses, and that's exactly what happened in this game. So after black played g5, white is actually going after a newly created weakness on h6, rook h8. If now black captures on h4, white could simply capture on h6, and then the pawn on h4 will be lost as well. Came rook h8, and black responded with rook d8. And as they say, from here on that now white is a pawn up already, the rest is matter of technique. But Ivanchuk showed an excellent, masterful way of playing, so let's see what that meant. Came rook g8, and now this is a little trick. As if white would play h5, all of a sudden the rook on h6 would find itself almost in a trapped position, so it's best not to do that. But white played f3, preparing to protect the pawn on g4 for the future opening of the g file, so the g4 pawn is just fine. And now black played d5, yet another tricky move. Of course, at the level of Ivanchuk and Kamsky, it's out of question that somebody would fall into such a cheapo, as they say, the bishop would find itself in a devastating pin. And white simply improves his position, bringing the king closer to the center and out of the pin along the g-file. Came rook b8, and still taking on d5 is not a good idea for the same reason. White brings the king further towards the middle of the board. King d6, and now rook h6, attacking the knight, and also, by the way, threatens to capture the pawn on d5 due to the pin over the knight. Protecting the knight from e5 would not be a good idea, as white could immediately play f4 check, and then after king e6 use the pin with g5. Came rook h6 and rook b to e8 check. The idea is that if now white moves to d3, black can protect the knight with the rook, and after rook takes pawn, even though white is up 2 pawns, black would get some counterplay here due to the fact that now they have 2 connected passed pawns and the knight has some activity coming up. So there is no reason to give any counter chance for black. It's much better to go to the other side to f4. What white is going after is the pawn on d5. For example, if now rook e6, g5, simply chasing the knight away and then grabbing the pawn on d5 with a check. The game continued with black's intermediate move, moving the king, ignoring the attack on the knight due to the attack on white's rook on d4. The rook retreated, so now black again needs to attend to the attack on the knight. Came rook g6. And this is another moment where Ivanchuk avoids any counterplay of black. It seems tempting at first to trade and go after the pawn with king g5, but after rook e6, white would not be able to capture the pawn anyway because of the discovery. King f5, knight takes rook, king takes, and all of a sudden, after the exchange of the last minor pieces on the board, black's d-pawn simply runs away, and in fact it is black who is winning. Look at that. It seems that the race still kind of ends in a tie, but the problem is that after white promotes his own pawn, the queen will be lost right away after the skewer with queen d5. So you can see how this would certainly not be a good idea and would give black unnecessary chances to get back into the game. Therefore, white simply keeps both rooks on the board by playing rook h1 with the idea to again play g5 next, chasing the knight away from the protection of the d5 pawn. Came rook e to g8, trying to prevent exactly that. Rook c1 check, king d6, and now white gains full control of the c-file. As you see, black is kind of trying to hold things together, but then each time a new different problem comes along. Now it is the control of the c-file. Rook d8 and rook c7. All of a sudden, white not only threatens the pawn on f7, but also threatens to checkmate on the very next move. Came rook d7, and the check arrived. King e7. And now came bishop to c2. Now the bishop is heading to f5. For example, if the rook retreats, comes bishop f5, forcing the trade of the rooks. And now if black wants to hang on to his f7 pawn, then the king appears on e5, attacking the knight, and for the least the pawn on d5 will be lost. Let's go back one more time. Bishop c2. Black responded in this position with d4, with a counter threat that if bishop takes rook on g6, then knight d5, and black is still in the game. Therefore, white traded rooks first. King had to take, otherwise Black's rook on g6 is lost for free, but even now Black is losing a second pawn, and that means the game, as White now has two connected passed pawns marching down, while the White king is still close enough to hold off the Black pawn, and therefore Kamsky resigned here. A very instructive game, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned some how to improve your position from a small strategical advantage, such as the opponent having weak pawns, how to improve your position little by little by little and prevent the opponent's counterplay. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this position, it looks pretty crazy, right? Well, Black has a pawn that's about to become a queen, and anyway, Black is up a number of pawns. In this beautiful position, it is White to move, and amazingly, there is one single way how White can win this game. Good luck in trying to solve this beautiful position. And the answer is Bishop e5, threatening to checkmate on d4. The only way Black can defend against it is by capturing the bishop. And now, check, king takes pawn, and all of a sudden, discover check, checkmate. Good luck in using similar strategies in your own games, and please be back next week to learn some more. Bye-bye.